young and old, are all going to leave the earth.
Chapter 1. The Optimist. May 18th, 1945. Cold River, South Carolina. Amandine Stuart was an optimist. Even as she was forcefully escorted from her home, she tried to imagine what adventures awaited her now that she was homeless. "You're doing your country a great service," said the assistant, who tugged her along by the elbow, but he only repeated what the administrator had said in the den. Amandine hardly agreed, though she wasn't about to admit that out loud. She took in what she could of the tall corridor instead, taking a final mental picture of the place that had once been her childhood home. She noted the thin scratch in the wallpaper beside the library door, the result of cannon fire during an epic imaginary naval battle between herself and the maid. The maid had disappeared with the rest of the household staff years ago, long before anyone in the government took any interest in the Stuart family. The girl hesitated for just a moment as she passed the staircase and reached for the banister. Her father put his hand here before he left, back when the wooden surface was still smooth and polished. Now it was grimy from neglect and marred by the scratches her mother left when she was dragged away. Fingertips tracing the gash, Amandine realized that this was the last place each member of the Stuart family touched before they left this house for good. She was jarred from her thoughts when the assistant gave her a shove between her shoulders. "Have a good day," he barked. "Hail to the Republic." And with that, the double doors slammed shut behind her. Amandine smoothed her blue silk dress and looked around. The sun warmed the crisp air after a recent spring rain. It was the kind of day where she once might have liked to take some books outside or play tennis, but the hills surrounding the great house had returned to wilderness. Unkempt shrubs bloomed, and the lawns, once a smooth, striped emerald, were now waist-deep and full of weeds. Amandine descended the steps from the house just as 3 government trucks circled the cobblestone courtyard. Tailgates dropped with a bang, and soldiers unloaded boxes and furniture with trained uniformity. "Well, they're certainly excited to move in," she thought, keeping out of their way. They didn't even wait for the ink to dry. Since the soldiers weren't paying her any attention, she took the opportunity to reclaim her bicycle. She had to free the garage door from a wall of vines, but she found her bike precisely where she left it 3 years ago, hanging on the wall above her father's dusty deluxe roadster. Amandine was nearly ready to go. She pumped air into the tires, secured her suitcase to the bike with a length of twine, and double-checked her coat pocket for the envelope full of crisp blue New American Republic dollars that the administrator had given her in exchange for her property. As an afterthought, she kept a single bill from the envelope and hid the rest inside her dress front until she got a chance to conceal it somewhere safer. Satisfied, she walked the bike out the back and kicked the door shut behind her. She pushed off of the cobblestone and buzzed past the preoccupied soldiers. She offered a quick glance over her shoulder to the red brick Georgian house, where the marble statues of Mercury and Arachne that flanked the doorway were already being swapped for a pair of dour-looking griffins. "Bye, house," she murmured. Amandine wanted to wave, but a sharp twinge deep in her chest stopped her. She gripped the handlebars until her fingers turned white and the feeling seeped away. With a deep breath, she smiled at the sun-dappled road ahead. She didn't dwell on the fact that her house, and all that remained of her life before the war, was now the governing administrator's offices. She only hoped Mr. White at the bakery could make her a sandwich for the road. Administrator Peter Graft puffed his chest with pride as he toured the new premises. Securing the Stuart house had been quite a piece of luck, and he was confident that his new offices were now the finest in the state. He explored the master bedroom upstairs, imagining it as a lounge or smoking room where he could entertain his superiors. He went to the window to admire the view of the countryside, but when he drew back the curtains, the smug expression vanished from his face. A black sedan, trimmed in chrome and glistening like a beetle, rolled right into the middle of the courtyard where the administrator's men were unloading. Graft's throat felt tight. He wiped his sweating palms on his blue jacket and paced the room. If he had any question about exactly who was paying him a visit, his men's reaction removed all doubt. All at once, they dropped whatever they were carrying and stood at attention. "Attention! Inquester present!" A man stepped from the car and straightened his impeccably tailored black uniform. He scanned the courtyard, and suddenly his head jerked up towards the house. Graft stumbled back out of sight. He had no idea what an inquester was doing here, but he knew better than to keep his guest waiting. Breathing hard, he wiped his receding hair back and went down to meet him. Inquestors were the new American Republic's response to the civil unrest that ripped across the country after the 1932 election. Distinguished by their black high officers' uniforms and the silver catamount insignia on their shoulder, they prowled communities everywhere, working above the law to root out anyone who flouted the NAR's authority. Some of the most notorious insurrectionists were concealed within NAR ranks, and Graft dearly hoped that his impulsive property purchase didn't put him under suspicion. Nothing could save him if an inquester had him in his sights. "Those jealous bastards up at the Parisville office must have culled them," he thought to himself. "I bet they thought if they couldn't have the Stewart place, nobody should. I'll show them. I'll deal with this Inky first, then I'll show them good." By the time Graft made it downstairs, the officer was already in the foyer, examining the grand room around him. "Inquester," he tried to sound cheerful, but his voice trembled. "Welcome. I'm Administrator Peter Graft." The man turned on his heels. He was a little smaller and much younger than any high officer Graft had ever seen. He couldn't have been any older than 25, and mischief glittered in his dark eyes. "Inquester Marcus Carver. Pleased to meet you." He dropped his rigid posture and shook Graft's hand as if they were old friends. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Your boys look busy outside." The administrator was caught off guard by the inquester's greeting, and he had to clear his throat. I apologize. I'm afraid we're in the middle of a move, and our offices are not operational at the moment." "Oh, I understand. I won't take up much of your time." Carver gestured with an open hand to the parlor. "I only have a few questions. Before we begin, would you mind if we sat down together?" "Of course not, Inquester," he chuckled nervously. "After you." Grinning, Carver gripped Graft's shoulder and forced him towards the doorway with a hard slap to the back. "No, Administrator, after you. I insist." The inquester followed closely, staying just out of Graft's peripheral vision as he led them to a set of couches arranged before the grand fireplace. Instead of sitting down, Carver glanced inside the fireplace and ran his fingers along the green marble mantel before taking a deep breath. He seemed disappointed. "Have you been here before, Inquester?" Graft asked, sitting down. "Yes." Carver folded his hands behind his back and rocked on his heels. "Oh, yes, I certainly have. Did you say you just bought this building?" "I did not, sir." "Someone outside must have said it," he shrugged. "Did you buy it today?" "Just now, sir." Everything about the inquester's attitude betrayed his frustration. "It's a shame this house will be turned into offices. This room was so nice for taking coffee." He went to where an elegant sideboard used to stand between two picture windows and prodded the indents in the rug with his polished shoe. "I don't suppose you've got the means to fix coffee yet, do you?" The administrator was about to call for some, but Carver held up his hand. "Don't trouble yourself unless you've already got a pot going. I was just reminiscing about the last time I visited here." He sat across from Graft and shouted in surprise when the deep cushions of the new couch nearly swallowed him. "What a gas!" he cackled. "The lady of the house made such a fine cup of coffee, wouldn't you say?" "I wouldn't know," came Graff's guarded reply. "She didn't offer me any, and hardly seemed old enough to know how to brew it properly herself." Carver's expression clouded in confusion as he attempted to sit up straight. "I was talking about the girl's mother, Caroline Stewart." "Never heard of her." Graff shook his head. "My dealings were with the girl only." "Didn't she seem a bit young to be quite so affluent?" Carver swept his arm across the room. His gaze caught on something high up on the opposite end of the parlor, and Graff had to turn to see what captured his attention. It was an oil painting of the Stewart family wearing their Sunday best in that very parlor. The father was an imposing man who stood protectively behind his seated wife and the cherubic baby girl in her lap. Though his expression was fairly neutral, Graff got the impression that he was glaring at him, almost as if he was daring him to disrupt the happy life he had made for himself. "Her paperwork was in order," Graff explained, drawing the inquestor's focus back. "Since she was 17, she was legally entitled to all of her family's property. After the war, it didn't amount to much beyond this house, an empty textile factory 10 miles from here, and another empty store in town." "You bought all of it?" Carver hitched a brow. "How on earth did you approve the funds?" "It was completely within my office's budget, sir," he explained. "The girl was willing to accept my initial offer on the condition that I buy all of her property and pay cash. Frankly, it seemed like she was in a hurry to leave town." The inquestor tapped his fingers together as he absorbed these facts. "Were those her only conditions?" "Yes, sir." "Did you make any conditions of your own? Perhaps a little incentive to keep the price so low?" Graff blinked. "No, sir. It was all approved by my legal administrator and detailed in the contract. I can retrieve it for you right. I just think it's funny that you'd buy so much useless property instead of just sending the girl to the replacement home and confiscating it all," Carver interrupted, but then he waved the thought aside. "But never mind that. Chasing up girls for the home isn't your department. Did Amandine tell you what happened to her parents?" Graff was relieved that he could finally provide some answers to the inquestor. "Her father served in both wars, killed in action a little over 2 years ago, I believe." "Interesting." Carver took out a notepad from his pocket and began writing furiously. "Branch and rank?" "Navy. He was captain of the NARS Osiris, lost in the Atlantic." Graff's good memory had always served him well, and he was glad it didn't fail him now despite his anxiety. "And her mother?" Carver pressed. He used such a peculiar emphasis that Graff suspected this was the heart of the matter. "She didn't say. I assume she died as well. Fever epidemic or something." Carver laughed inwardly and put his notebook away. "No, she didn't." Graff was afraid of this. The inquestor knew much more than he was letting on. "Is it this Caroline you're after, sir?" "No, not any more," he replied, his smile unwavering. "I popped by for a visit, I suppose it was 2 months ago now. She invited me in, fixed me a coffee right where we're sitting, and after we had a little chat about what she'd been up to, I hit her." He drew his gun, a nickel-plated 1911, with a gleaming pearl grip, and the administrator recoiled in shock. "I hit her over the head again and again with this pistol for trying to feed me a load of hokum about how she was just a war hero's widow. You see, she was a rebel fighter, and not just any fighter. No, I've got her linked directly to the leaders." He burst out with wild laughter as he played with his gun, pulling back the hammer and releasing it slowly. Click, 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 click. "You mean she was the Caroline Stewart? The one they locked up for working with Ptolemy and Cleo?" Graff desperately wanted the inquestor to put the gun away. "But if you have Caroline already, then you must be after the girl." "I am." He caught his breath and wiped at a tear. "But the girl was a shut-in. Why didn't you just arrest her with her mother?" "You must not have been in your position long, Administrator." Carver's tone suddenly dropped to a low and dangerous growl. Click, click. Otherwise, you would know it's not a good idea to pry an inquester for confidential information, and you've already done so 3 times. I'm sorry, Inquester, Graff stammered. What the hell? I'll tell you anyway. Carver's cheerful demeanor returned, without a trace of his momentary hostility. It was an oversight. I was just so giddy about Caroline, I didn't even stop to think about the girl upstairs. Serves me right. A stitch in time saves 9, and now I've got a couple of loose ends to tie up if I ever want to see the end of this investigation. This is where you come in, Administrator. He leaned forward and lowered his voice to an excited whisper. Did you know that this was a rebel's safe house when you bought it? Come on now, you can tell me. He punched him lightly in the arm. Tell me, just like little Miss Amandine told you. She didn't tell me anything, he rasped, watching the gun intently for any sudden movements. Carver still hadn't let the hammer down. Hoss feathers! The inquester laughed again, as if Graff was playing a hilarious trick on him. I know you have a way with the young ladies. Startled, he finally looked up from the gun to Carver. Sir? You're a popular customer over at the replacement home, he said, shaking a finger at him. All those young widows and orphan daughters, they all need someone to care for them. I hear you do that very well. Graff paled. How could the inquester have possibly known about that? He never visited the same replacement home twice. He never left a clue or used his real name. A flash of his badge was all it took to grant him unfettered access to a menagerie of eligible, desperate women. All those girls with rebel ties. Carver was motionless and wide-eyed, like a snake about to strike. And they're all missing. Nowhere to be found. No, sir, please, let me... Now the daughter of a murderess runs free with a pocket full of taxpayers' cash while you look after her safe house. I wonder what the boys in blue will uncover if I turn them loose in that empty factory. Graff saw the end of the gun move in his direction. In a panic, he cried, The girl left 15 minutes ago. She said she was heading to Nuvestad to see her mother. That's all I know, Inquester, I swear it. Carver seemed startled by this outburst. He looked down at his gun, and with an embarrassed laugh, he finally let down the hammer and turned the weapon over in his hand. Nuvestad, you say? He stood and replaced his hat over his glossy black hair. Thank you. That is most helpful. Was that all? The administrator thought. He took a ragged breath and rose unsteadily to his feet. Will there be anything else, Inquester? Carver recovered his formality and bowed. No, thank you. I just about have what I was after, so I will let you get back to work and see myself out. Hail to the Republic! The moment the inquester was out of the parlor, Graff slumped down on the couch and buried his face in his hands. His entire body shook as he reflected on how narrowly he avoided trouble. Such a shame about this house, he heard Carver say from directly behind him. His blood turned to ice when he heard the sound he'd never hoped to hear again. Click, click. It's so luxurious. I feel just awful every time I have to make a mess in here.